Only one of baseball's traditional 16 teams never won a World Series, but the St. Louis Browns came closer than you think. The 1944 World Series, as you've never seen it before, is next. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Sports Rewind, the channel that takes a fresh look at the old. If it was overlooked or misunderstood in sports history, we're going to talk about it. I'm your host, Ken Tomash. Today, the story of the St. Louis Browns in the 1944 World Series with enhanced video and insight from an expert in Browns history. First, we're going to rewind to 1944 and tell you what was going on in the world. Obviously, the biggest story of the year was the Allied invasion of Normandy, the largest amphibious military operation in history. On June 6th, 155,000 troops landed on the beaches from the air and from the sea. D-Day helped liberate France from Nazi Germany and helped turn the tide in the European theater of World War II. Also in 1944, Casablanca, set against the backdrop of the war, won Best Picture at the 16th Annual Academy Awards. Michael Curtiz won the Best Director Oscar for his work on the film. Franklin Roosevelt won an unprecedented fourth consecutive presidential nomination at the Democratic National Convention. He was dead within a year, and Vice Presidential pick Harry Truman took office for the final months of the war. At Camp Hood, Texas, First Lieutenant Jackie Robinson was arrested and later court-martialed for refusing to move to the back of a segregated Army bus. He was acquitted, but it presaged what he would face 3 years later in breaking baseball's color barrier. And for the first and only time in their history, the St. Louis Browns won the American League pennant. Their opponents in what would be called the Streetcar Series, well, the St. Louis Cardinals. And what a great series it was. We're going to take a look at that series, what it meant, and what you might have missed. So we'll bring in Jeff Huestler, who is a member of the St. Louis Browns Historical Society and the founder of the website stlbrowns764.com. Jeff, welcome to Sports Rewind.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me today.
Jeff, it's been 70 plus years since the Browns left St. Louis, yet there are still Browns fans, including yourself. Why is that?
I think the St. Louis Browns, there's a very romantic idea about them, being the fact that they were considered to be not a very good team, that they had a lot of challenges throughout the entire course of their franchise. They were always second fiddle to the Yankees and to their neighbors in St. Louis, the Cardinals. And they had a lot of great players that never really seemed to get their true, their true rewards from the media and from the public. And I think people are attracted to that.
And also, they seem to be unfairly shorthand for some fans for the sad sack team that lost all the time. But really, they only had a run of 12 consecutive losing seasons, which is not only not a record, it's not a franchise record. It's the Orioles, since in Baltimore, had a 14-year streak. The record is 20. And by the time you see this, the Angels may or may not have had 10 in a row. So why do the Browns get labeled as perennial losers? They were in the second division a lot, but they only had that one streak where they were really, really, really terrible.
Well, you got to look at the time period in which they played. Every other team in the American League from 1902, when the Browns started, to 1953, every other team in the American League had enjoyed a long period of winning. I mean, the Yankees, they won their 16 World Series. Boston had 3 World Series championships. Philadelphia had 4. Detroit and Cleveland both had 2. And even the Washington Nationals, or Washington Senators, they had 1 World Series, but they were in 3 others. So every other team in the American League at one point enjoyed a long period, almost you want to call like a dynasty, short dynasty, and the Browns really never had that. So because of that, they were always looked down at. History has always looked down upon them as really never being able to win anything.
Now, the closest they did come to a pennant before 1944 was 1922, when they missed out by 1 game to the Yankees. That was the only Browns team ever to play 600 ball. And in the early years of the live ball, they were quite an offensive machine, weren't they? Tell us how that pennant race wound up.
The 1922 St. Louis Browns were statistically the best team in the American League. They would lead the American League in runs, hits, triples, stolen bases, batting average, slug, on-base percentage, and total bases. And they were second in the league in doubles and home runs. Pitching-wise, they led the league in team ERA, saves, and strikeouts. They allowed the fewest hits, they allowed the fewest runs, and the fewest walks. So statistically, the 1922 team was better than everybody. They had George Sisler, who ended up being the first American League MVP. He would lead the league in WAR, runs, hits, triples, stolen bases, and would bat .420 in that time period. At the same time, they had an outfielder by the name of Ken Williams. And Ken Williams lives in the shadow of Babe Ruth, because in 1922, he led the American League with 39 home runs, 155 RBIs, and 367 total bases. I mean, he was a machine. And in that year, while leading in those categories, when it came time to vote for the MVP, he didn't receive a single vote towards the MVP. Because, again, he lived in the shadow of Babe Ruth, who was in New York and hitting all those home runs. But that was his 1 year. The one other thing you have to realize about the Browns team of the early 1920s is that they had an outfield of Ken Williams, Baby Doll Jacobson, and Jack Tobin. And in a 4-year period, all three of those outfielders would bat over 300. That has not been done since, and it had not been done before. Matter of fact, that record actually would have gone for 5 seasons, but Jack Tobin batted .299 in 1924. So they had the offense. They just unfortunately could not beat the Yankees.
Now, you mentioned George Sisler. He's the only current Hall of Famer from that team, and he's one of only 2 non-Cardinals with a statue outside Busch Stadium in St. Louis, as we see here. Do modern fans know much about George Sisler, or do they only know him from when Ichiro broke his single-season hits record, do you think?
I hate to say it. I think modern fans have, and even the modern media have kind of forgotten about George Sisler and everything that he did. I mean, it's extremely unfortunate. A couple of years ago, I called into a national radio station when they were talking about great hitters in Baltimore Orioles history, and I asked them if they were going to talk about George Sisler, and the gentleman who was hosting the show said on the air, "Who is George Sisler?" So I think that a lot of the media and the player and the fans of today have forgotten about him, but he was an amazing player, amazing fielder. He started off as a pitcher, and if it wasn't for an sinus infection that affected his vision in 1923, there's no doubt that the 22 team could have had success in 1923, but Sisler would miss the entire season.
So what types of things can folks find on your site?
On my website, it is the only daily website that is totally dedicated to the history of the St. Louis Browns. Every day I have a new player profile, and that player profile is an individual who's born on this given day. I try to go through there, and I try to go through most of their career, including what led up to them playing with the Browns and what happens to them after they played with the Browns. Also on my website, I have broken down every trade, every debut, every game that was played on each individual day. I try to give a summary of events that took place on a given day within within the calendar year, especially within the baseball schedule. Also within my website, I break down every team as far as their lineups, how they participate in individual seasons. Like this week, I think I'm looking at 1934 team. So I have one day dedicated to the lineup, one day dedicated to their offensive output, their pitching output, their manager, major players. I also have a spot on my website that is dedicated to oddities within St. Louis Browns history. I break down the different managers, ownership, and some fun facts as well.
So very, very, very thorough. If you're very curious about anything that happened with the St. Louis Browns, you've got it covered. And one of those things I'm sure that people may be curious about, because it's a story that they may kind of know about, but may not be sure of the facts on, were whether or not the Browns really were all set to move to Los Angeles, with a move to be announced on December 8th, 1941, a date that many people will recognize right away. What is the real story when it comes to the Browns and a potential move to Los Angeles?
Well, it's funny because depending upon what you read, and there's a lot of stories out there, the Browns were very close to becoming the first team in California in 1941. They basically, the ownership of the Browns had begun to look at the ideas of what would happen if they did move out to Los Angeles. At the time, the current Los Angeles Angels, the PCL team, was playing there. Arrangements were made to have the LA Angels of the PCL move to Long Beach so that the Browns would be able to secure territorial rights within the region. They had arranged and approved transportation through TWA and the Los Angeles Santa Fe Railroad to where transportation from teams coming from Chicago all the way out to LA could be done. They had preliminary approval by all the owners. They were just waiting for that one vote. They even had an agreement with the St. Louis Cardinals where the Cardinals were going to pay $250,000 to help the Browns out of St. Louis. And they had financial backing in play from many different organizations within LA. So were they possibly moving out to California? In hindsight, I would say, yeah, everything was all set and ready to go. They just needed that one vote on that day in December, the 8th of December, 1941.
Okay, so now we're up to 1944. And again, the Browns get hit with shorthand. Oh, it was during the war. That's the only reason they won. Wartime baseball was definitely very different, but the Browns were showing signs of coming around even before that 1944 season, even before Pearl Harbor. I mean, that started with Luke Sewell's hiring as manager in June of 1941. What kind of a player was Luke Sewell, and what did that help make him into the type of manager that he was as we look at this 1944 team?
Well, Luke Sewell was a hard-nosed individual, very, very strong baseball player, believed in a team winning concept. He came from the Cleveland Indians, if I'm not mistaken. Right. Yep, came from the Cleveland Indians. He was a very loyal coach with the Cleveland Indians, and he really didn't want the managerial position with the Browns. It's not what he was looking to do. Matter of fact, the owner of the Indians, a guy by the name of Alva Bradley, urged Luke Sewell to take a shot because he saw the idea that Luke Sewell could become a very good, very successful manager at the major league level. So he kind of pushed him into it. The general manager of the Browns was a guy by the name of Bill DeWitt, and Bill DeWitt Sr. Met with Luke Sewell and convinced Luke Sewell to take the position. And he started the job on June 5th, 1941. Now, at the time, the Browns were 15-29. After the hiring of Luke Sewell in 1941, the Browns would finish at a 500, 55-55 afterwards. So they finished very strong in the 1941 and 1942 seasons.
So, yeah, in 1943, they slipped back under 500. And you were telling me going into 1944, they only had a handful of players under contract, which is unheard of. Where did they go and find guys?
Well, with the war going on, most of the players, when the offseason kicked in, went into the war production business, went into the war industry, and they didn't really know who was going to be able to return and play for them in 1944. Now, there are reports that are saying that they may have had as few as 8 players when spring training was just about ready to start. They had to go out there and they had to make sure that who could play, who was able to play, and find them and bring them on into camp.
So they started 1944 winning their first 9 games. They were in first place most of the season and never more than 3.5 games behind. But as all great pennant races do, this one came right down to the end. What happened in that last week? What needed to happen and what did happen in that last week for the St. Louis Browns?
Well, they were battling with the Detroit Tigers. The Detroit Tigers were neck and neck with the Browns, and it actually came down to the last series for the Browns. The series that the Browns had to win was against the New York Yankees, and it would all go down to the last day. And within the last day, one of the Browns hitters, a gentleman by the name of Chet Lambs, he would hit 2 home runs, and it propelled the Browns over the Yankees as the Tigers are losing their last couple of games. So the Tigers lost on the last day, the Browns won, and the Browns made it to the World Series 1944.
An outstanding team, an outstanding upset, and everybody in St. Louis obviously went nuts for that because the first time that had ever happened. So they're going to go to the World Series, and their opponents are their roommates, the Cardinals, who had won back-to-back National League pennants and the 1942 World Series, and they'd won 105 games for the second straight year. That is still tied for the second most wins in Cardinal history. And the Cardinals were 2-1 favorites to win the series. But at that point, you'd have to figure the Browns and their fans at least had momentum on their side, and they had to be thinking they got a shot at this thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely, because all they always say that all you need to do is get into the dance, and we'll see what happens. Because the Cardinals, they led in every single offensive statistical category in the National League. The Browns didn't. The Browns did not have a strong statistical team, but they got in, and the city of St. Louis, the stories that I've been told, were absolutely, infatuated with this series, thinking that the Browns could take them, could take the series and the World Championship.
So now let's take a look at the lineups for each team. And you being the historian, give us a little bit about each player that we're going to see here, the regular 8, the starting 8 for each team. And we'll start with the top of the Browns order.
So you had Don Gutteridge, who was a former St. Louis Cardinal player. He was actually part of the Gas House gang. He played for the Cardinals from 36 through 1940. He had a 965 fielding percentage. However, he did make 35 errors throughout the 1944 season, which did lead the American League. The next individual you have up there is Mike Kravich. Okay, he played with the Browns from 43 to 45. 1944 was his best season. He batted .301, 121 hits, and 15 doubles. Chet Labs was the individual we talked about earlier, 1943 All-Star. He would be a platoon outfielder for the Browns at the time. He would work in with Milt Burns as well as Kravich and Gene Moore. Vern Stevens played with the Browns from 1940 through 1947. He was a 6-time All-Star. He had 109 RBIs in 1944. And in 1945, the following year, he would actually lead the American League in home runs with 24 home runs. In 1944, he would come in third in the MVP voting within the American League.
Okay, now the bottom of the order.
Okay, we have Gene Moore. Gene Moore only played 2 seasons, and actually Gene Moore came into joined the Browns prior to the 1944 season. Okay, he was traded for by Luke Sewell. We were able to get him on March 28th, 1944. We got him from Washington. It was the 6th and final team that he would play for, and he would fit almost perfectly into the Browns' rotation of outfielders. Now, the next individual is, again, one of those underappreciated players of the 1940s. George McQuinn was the backbone of the St. Louis Browns during this time period. The Browns actually got him in a Rule 5 draft in 1939 from the Yankees. And the Yankees always wanted to kind of keep him around because he was going to be the heir apparent to Lou Gehrig. But the Browns were able to acquire him. He ended up being a 4-time All-Star, absolutely the best hitter for the Browns during this time period. Mark Chrisman is the next one you got up there. He would play with the Browns from 1939. He played from 1943 through 46 as well. He would have a .271 batting average, 1944. And in the same year, he had his career best 148 hits, 25 doubles, 83 RBIs, and he would have 47 walks. He was an on-base machine. And then you have Red Hayworth up there. Now, Red Hayworth is actually the younger brother of a Browns catcher that came in a couple years prior to him named Ray Hayworth. Now, Red Hayworth shared the catching duties with Frank Mancuso, played 90 games, batted .222 in his rookie season of 1944.
Now, you may probably notice as we look at the Cardinals lineup now, these names may be a little bit more recognizable to the average fan, including the big one there.
So Johnny Hop, you have up there to start off with, a 3-time All-Star with the Cardinals, played from 39 through 45. He actually received MVP voting 3 different times during his period with the Cardinals. Ray Sanders, first baseman, he played with St. Louis from 42 through 45. His best year came in 44, where he had 12 home runs, 102 RBIs, and batted .295. Stan Musial is Stan Musial, probably one of the best players in the history of the game, and still is underrated as far as comparisons with other players of his era and even players of today. Stan Musial was the greatest. 1943 MVP. During the 44 season, he batted .347. Now you have Walker Cooper. Walker Cooper was an all-star catcher, played for the Cardinals from 44 through 45, 3-time all-star. He was runner-up to the MVP in 1943.
And as we look at the bottom half of the regular 8 for the Cardinals. A couple of these guys, I mean, Marty Marion obviously is an MVP and a great player, but a couple of these guys are a little underrated too.
Correct. Whitey Kowalski, he finally got credit from the St. Louis Cardinals organization a couple of years ago. He was inducted into the Cardinals Hall of Fame. This gentleman was a 4-time All-Star. He received MVP votes 5 different times during his time with the Cardinals, which is basically up to 1940s, 1940 through 1948. During the 1944 season, he had 188 putouts from the third base position, and he had a .965 fielding percentage, which led the American League. The next player you have up there is Danny Litweiler. He played with the Cardinals from 1943 through 46. He platooned in the outfield, but his best season was in 1944 with 130 hits and 82 RBIs. Marty Marion was a career St. Louis baseball player. Not only did he play with the Cardinals from 1940 through 1950, he would finish his career with the St. Louis Browns 1952 to 1953. He was a 7-time All-Star. He received MVP votes 7 different times, and everybody knows he won the MVP in 1944. And Emil Verban, he was the second baseman before Red Shandy's got in. He played with the Cardinals from 1944 through 45. He was a rookie in this 44 campaign. He led all second basemen, turning 105 double plays.
Now, before we look at each of these games, all the videos you're about to see have been AI enhanced and colorized to give them a little different look than maybe you're used to seeing. Sometimes the colorization is really good. Other times it's not quite as good, but it's still an interesting look, I think. And when I said it was the 1944 World Series as you've never seen it before, I was saying the truth. So, Jeff, what was the atmosphere in St. Louis? You touched on it a little bit. The atmosphere in St. Louis going into game 1 on that Wednesday after the Sunday finale of the regular season.
The stories that I've been told is that there was excitement everywhere. People stood in line for tickets. There was buzz everywhere. The St. Louis became the center of the baseball world. Now, prior to this, it had always been in New York or Boston or Chicago, and this was the furthest Western World Series played at that time. So this was more like a Midwest World Series than an East Coast World Series that had been seen before. And everybody could not wait to get into that ballpark.
Yeah, you were used to seeing the park filled for Cardinals games. For Browns games, not so much until very late, but this would be a celebration of the game in the city for that they hoped would be an entire week. One of the really interesting sidebars to the fact that the team shared a ballpark is that obviously they were never home at the same time. You look at Chet Labs and his kid. So managers Sewell and Billy Southworth of the Cardinals shared living quarters, and when the series came up, they had to flip a coin to figure out who would get to stay in the digs for the week.
That is correct. That is correct. And if I'm not mistaken, it's Luke Sewell that won the coin flip.
He did. What was Sportsman's Park like? As we look, Connie Mack is here. He was at every World Series all the time. Notable by his absence was the commissioner, Kennesaw Mountain Landis. He was sick and hospitalized back in Chicago. He eventually died a couple months later. We see, obviously, wartime personnel coming back. But what was Sportsman's Park like as a park?
Sportsman's Park was, first of all, when you watch these scenes, you have to realize that during the game, the shadows that were projected onto the field must have been just a challenge for the batters to hit anything coming off the pitcher's mound. The outfield was huge, 400 plus all the way around. It had huge alleys to it. The field was in relatively good shape for when the World Series kicked in, because there's 162 games played on this field. That's twice as many as played in any other field across the American and National League games. So the field was in good shape. The stands were packed. The crowd was all there. But I mean, you can see the shadows of the light stanchions and the right field bleachers and everything coming onto the field. It had to have been a huge challenge.
No doubt. One quick caveat: 154 games at that point in baseball history, not 162, but still a lot of wear and tear. And this was the first time in many years that there had been a two-team a World Series from teams in the same city. I mean, it happened in New York, but you have to go back to the Cubs and the White Sox in 1906 to find any city outside of New York where that had happened. And the last time that before this, that two teams that shared a ballpark, which obviously nobody does anymore, played in the World Series was when the Yankees and Giants in 1922, because they shared the Polo Grounds. That was the last year before the house that Ruth built became really the house that Ruth built before they opened that. So let's go game one of the 1944 World Series. Jeff and I are going to take you through the highlights of this one. This first game was on the afternoon. They were all afternoon of October 4th, 2 o'clock Central Time. More than 33,000 folks jammed Sportsman's Park for the start of the series between the 89-win Browns and, again, the 105-win Cardinals. And the Cardinals were 2-1 favorites. And this was, of course, during the war. There was even more than the normal pageantry for an opening game. And Luke Sewell in this one played a hunch, and he started journeyman right-hander Denny Galehouse. It was Mort Cooper who started for the Cardinals. He gets things going with a strike to Don Guttridge. And the Cardinals loaded the bases in the bottom of the third off Galehouse, but they did not score. But here we see Gene Moore singling a right off Cooper. Browns had a base runner, and that brought up George McQuinn. He could hit a homer now and again, couldn't he?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, George McQuinn. This is the fourth inning. Okay, these were the only two hits that were given up by Cooper on that day. A single to Moore and McQuinn's home run.
And McQuinn was a 19-year-old elevator operator playing for a semi-pro team in Virginia when he got a pro tryout, and eventually, as you said, wound up with the Yankees. He's the hero of the week for the Browns for sure. Now, Sewell wouldn't say why he went with Galehouse over 19-game winner Nels Potter, but Galehouse pitched shutout ball into the ninth. Marty Marion hit this liner to center that Mike Krivich had for an instant, but it didn't stick in his glove. It was a double for Marion, runner in scoring position. That brought up Augie Bergamo, whose only two big league seasons were during the war. He did the job here as a pinch hitter, getting the grounder to get Marion to third with one out. And that brought up another pinch hitter, Ken O'Day. He hit this fly ball to center. Now, today, this would be a sacrifice fly, but remember, that rule was not in effect in 1944, so it's just an out. But Marion did score. He had plenty of time, lots of space out in the outfield. It's 2-1. Cardinals down to their last out, though. Galehouse took care of that. He gets Johnny Hopp to fly to center to end it. 2-1 Browns as they took game one, despite, as you said, getting only 2 hits. What kind of shockwave did that result send through the baseball world?
Well, no one expected that. No one expected, first of all, for Denny Galehouse to just come to not only get the start, but to pitch as well as he did. No one expected him to be able to just shut down the Cardinals' vaunted offense and to hold the Browns to only 2 hits, and those 2 hits being leading to the 2 runs that wins the game. It turned all the attention to people questioning the Browns to say, wait a minute, maybe they actually can take the series.
Now, this being a series played all in one ballpark, obviously there were no travel days. And in fact, sometimes there weren't any even travel days when they were playing in separate parks. I mean, in the 1934 World Series, guys would play and they'd get right on the train and they would go. I mean, it was only Detroit to St. Louis, but still a little bit not what we're used to. So they came right back the next day for game 2 and bypassed in game 1. Nels Potter got the start in game 2. What kind of pitcher was Potter?
First of all, he was the ace of the team. 19-7 during the regular season. 2.83 ERA. He was by far the strongest arm that they had at the time. Now they're going up against Max Lanier right there, and Lanier was 17-12. Again, his ERA was 2.65, but Lanier also led the National League with a 5.7 strikeout per 9 inning ratio.
And they matched zeros through 2.5. Bottom of the third, Emile Verbon singled to left for the Cardinals' second base run of the game. Here's a key moment. Lanier bunts, as one did then, and Potter makes not one but 2 errors on this play. First, he bobbles the ball, and then after he does come up with it in his glove, he fires to first, but it is not in time, and the ball gets away. Lanier is safe. Verbon goes to third, and this one would definitely come back to haunt the Browns. His runner goes to third base there, and this is setting things up. The Cardinals are feeling good. It's that man, Augie Bergamo, again. He does the job again with the ground out. This time it's to score Verbon with an unearned run. Put the Cardinals up 1-0 after 3. We go to the bottom of the 4th, still 1-0. 1 out, 1 on. Whitey Kurowski singles to left. That sends Ray Sanders to second. And now we see the second key play on which this game and maybe the series itself turned. Mark Christman can't handle this hot shot slapped down the third base line by Marty Marion. That scored an error. It loads the bases. Christman led AL third baseman in fielding in 1944, but not there. And that turns into another unearned run as Verban flies to Chet Labs in left. Another one that would have been a sac fly today, but it's 2-0 Cardinals. That left the Browns kicking themselves. Max Lanier retired 8 of the next 9 men he faced after that. But the top of the 7th, they finally get to him. Gene Moore's single to center for their second hit of the day. Red Hayworth, who you talked about, the rookie catcher, he doubled in Moore to cut the lead to 2-1. Hayworth was later one of the guys who jumped to the Mexican League, another interesting story in baseball history. The Browns weren't done. Sewell sent Frank Mancuso up to pinch hit for Potter, and his double scored Hayworth to make it 2-2. And the Browns had to be relieved to tie it, but surely they felt they should have been ahead at that point. Looking to rectify that, Mike Krivich led off the top of the 8th in this 2-2 game with a fly ball double to left. Krivich a 300 hitter that year, so Southworth went to the bullpen, and Blix Donnelly, his real name was Sylvester, a 30-year-old rookie in 1944 rather, the biggest moment of his life right here. He gets Chet Labs on the strikeout after Labs tried to bunt. Then Vern Stevens struck out. Donnelly had once struck out 19 men in a Florida State League game. They put George McQuinn on, take no chances with him, and then Donnelly got Mark Christman, strike 3 to end the inning. Another missed opportunity for the Browns. Scoreless through the 8th, 9th, and 10th. We go to the top of the 11th. Blix Donnelly still in there. No intentional walk. This time, McQuinn doubles off the screen in right. And now the key play of this game. Twice it was plays the Browns did not make. Now it's one the Cardinals do make. Christman lays down the bunt, but Donnelly makes a great play to get the lead runner, McQuinn at third. Let's look at this one again with the rudimentary replay we have. This is the sort of play that you'd see over and over again in 4K from multiple angles today. But this is what we have. National League umpire Ziggy Sears at third didn't hesitate. Right into the shadows you talked about. It says he's out. And 2 outs later, we are still scoreless. And so that's a great play right there that this game kind of turned on. Turned into this. Bottom of the 11th, Ray Sanders led off against Bob Moncrief with a ground ball single to second. Whitey Kurowski sacrificed him to second base. 8 sacrifice bunts in this series. You never see that today. Another thing you see a lot of, the intentional walk. So that puts Marty Marion on. Southworth sends Ken O'Day up to pinch hit for Emil Raban, and O'Day comes through with the line drive single to right to score Ray Sanders with the winning run. 3-2 Cardinals, but the Browns had to be feeling like they let this one get away and had a golden opportunity where they could have been up 2-0.
Absolutely. They had put themselves in a position to win the game. And like you mentioned, there were a couple key plays, a couple key calls by the umpires that turned that game around. But again, the game went into extra innings. The Browns got to Max Lanier, and the Browns had an opportunity right there for him, but the ball didn't bounce their way that game.
By the way, if you're asking yourself right now, is Max Lanier any relation to Hal Lanier, who managed the Astros? Yes, that is his father.
And
so now let's go to
Max Lanier would actually finish his career with the St. Louis Browns as well.
It seems like a lot of people did that, right?
They bounced back and forth.
Numbers of your 764 there. We're finishing out the string there. All right, so now we're going to go to game 3. So they always say if you get a split of the first 2 games in the World Series, if you're on the road, you're feeling good. This time, obviously, both teams were kind of at home, obviously, but it's still a split, but it's still not quite the seismic shock that first game was, but maybe so that the fact that the Browns had played so well to that point, and they're very definitely in the series. So let's go ahead and take a look at game 3 now. Jack Kramer hadn't been very good before the war, but after coming back from service, he was really good in 1944. He had 17 wins and 18 complete games for the right-hander. Ted Wilkes, meanwhile, another rookie, 28 years old. He went 17-4 and had won 11 straight at one point. He started for the Cardinals. The Cardinals got to Kramer in the top of the first, but it wasn't his fault. An error on Vern Stevens put Johnny Hopp on second base with 1 out. And after Stan Musial, remember him, popped out, Walker Cooper singled to left. That scored Hopp with another unearned run. It was 1-0 Cardinals. Do you think the Browns were a little uptight still?
They would commit 10 errors during this World Series. And I think it was like 7 runs were scored off of those errors.
They certainly were not nervous at the plate. You're watching this hit parade here in the bottom of the third. Singles by Gene Moore, Vern Stevens. Still, Wilkes only needs one more out to get out of the inning. He never got it. George McQuinn singled to center, scoring more and tying the game at 1, and the Browns have new life. Al Zarilla, a .299 hitter during the season, singled to left to score Stevens and give the Browns the lead at 2-1. We'll see Mark Christman hit one over short for an RBI single as well, scoring McQuinn and making it a 3-1 game. The Browns on top. That was it for Wilkes. In came Freddie Schmidt with runners at second and third and 2 out. Southworth again goes to the intentional walk option, puts Hayworth on to set up a force anywhere and try to get out of it. And that might have worked had Schmidt not uncorked a wild pitch into the shadow there. That scored Zarilla with the Browns' 4th run of the inning on 5 hits. Schmidt did get out of it, but the damage was done. Schmidt and Kramer combined to retire the next 18 hitters before Marty Marion singled to score Whitey Kurowski in the top of the 7th to cut it to 4-2. Schmidt's out of the game. Jurish comes back in for the Cards. Bottom of the 7th, Don Guttridge wasted no time. Line drive double to right field. 2 outs later, Guttridge is on third. Vern Stevens draws the walk, but the ball gets away from Walker Cooper. It's a passed ball that scores Guttridge, and it's 5-2 Browns. The very next hitter, that man again, George McQuinn. What a series he had. The double to right scored Stevens all the way from first, and it is 6-2. And people have to be thinking, what on earth has gotten into this Browns team? They had 2 hits in the first game and win. Now they're getting hits all over the place. Kramer went the distance on a 7-hitter. He struck out 10, including Danny Litweiler to end it. 6-2 Browns. They took a 2-1 lead in the series. So on the late afternoon of Friday, October 6th, 1944, Jeff Huestler, was this the high point in St. Louis Browns history, leading the Cardinals in the World Series?
Absolutely. I mean, it could absolutely be noted as the most important moment in Browns history because they had all the momentum. I mean, they won game 1 with only 2 hits. Now they uncorked the offense against the Cardinals. They were able to hold Cardinals down to just 2 runs, and they did it by playing small ball. Okay, lots of doubles, singles, run the bases, good strong fielding is good strong fielding, and it was their moment. At this point, the World Series was theirs to take.
Now, it is at this point that we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to let you experience the highlights along with the Mutual Radio Network broadcast call by Don Dunphy and Bill Slater. We'll set it up for you here. Saturday, October 7th, 1944, with the Browns leading 2-1. Harry Burkeen was the starter for the Cardinals, and Sig Jakuki, who has a fascinating story that we're going to talk about afterwards, started for the Browns. Here is how Game 4 unfolded with the broadcast by the Mutual Radio Network.
From Sportsman's Park in St. Louis, we bring you a word picture and play-by-play report of the 4th and thus far most crucial game in the 1944 Baseball Championship Series. Well, as you know by now, the St. Louis Browns, managed by Luke Sewell, are in the driver's seat, leading by 2 games to 1.
Here's the next pitch, and it's swung on. He strikes Litweiler out. Swings, hits it on the ground. It's to the right of Guttridge. He makes a nice stop on it, but can't control it, and Hop is on with an infield hit. Stan Musial, another left-handed hitter. Pitch to him, swung on. A long ball hit deep to right field. It's going far out into right field. It's landing on the roof for a home run. Pitch to Moore, swung on. It's a deep one, deep out into right field. Hop is running for it, makes an amazing catch, and then crashes against the wall. Now he throws the ball back to first. Previch is sprinting back, and Previch gets back. Cooper swings on it. It's a hit, going into left field. Litweiler is rounding third, coming in to score. The throw is to third. Litweiler scores, and the Cards are ahead 3-0. Swings, hits it on the ground. It's deep, too, and it goes through at second. Coming in to score is Musial. The throw to the plate is not in time, and Walker Cooper goes to third.
All right, here's the pitch. A line ground ball. Rectus Marion over to second, over to first. A double play. The run scores. Previch bats righty. Outfield a bit to the left. Here's the pitch. And there's a drive going down to the second baseman. Bourbon has it. A 4th out at second. The ball game is over. The Cardinals win 5-1, and the series is all even at 2 games apiece. If the Browns win, the Cardinals win. The Browns win, the Cardinals win, and there's another big game tomorrow.
So, some storylines there in Game 4, a 5-1 win for the Cardinals. One was the emergence of Stan Musial. He was only 3 for 12 in the first 3 games, but that homer really broke things open for the Cardinals and for him. He went on to have a great rest of the series.
Yes, he did. He ended up batting .304 in the series, and that was the hit that everybody was waiting for. Everybody was waiting for him to not just have, his singles came, but they were waiting for that one big hit that would propel the Cardinals on to winning more games, and came in Game 4.
Now, right before that, another key error by the Browns. We mentioned the 10 that they made in that series. That time it was Guttridge that cost them, and it did cost them big. Yeah,
it did. It was one of those, you can never actually say what happened. Did it hit, the infield looked like it was in some good shape, but got past them, and it continued to keep the ball rolling for the Cardinals in that game.
Now, let's talk about Sig Jakuki. Now, he only lasted 3 innings, 33 pitches. He took the loss, but he is such an interesting character that we have to hear his story. Tell us about Sig.
Well, the thing about Sig Jakuki, he's one of those individuals that wouldn't really last much in today's game. The stories that are about him is he absolutely loved to drink alcohol, and he came up with the Browns in the mid 1930s, and then he went and played semi-pro ball for a couple of years. Because of the war, he was brought back to the Browns, and they say he had, his arm was amazing, but he had $1 million thirst, and he would make all of his pitching starts. But between games, it got by midway through the season, Luke Sewell could not control Sig Jakuki, and he would continue to drink, and he would go away for a couple days. He would appear on the day he's supposed to pitch a great game, and go away for a couple days and come back. He was 13-9 during the season. Now, during the 1944 season, he did give up a league-leading 17 home runs. But there were a couple Browns that definitely enjoyed the drink during that time period, and he was the one who knew all the barkeeps in all the towns across the American League. The Browns had a couple players that enjoyed the drink. I mean, Vern Stevens and Bob Moncrief, and they would try to pair up the non-drinkers with the drinkers, but the drinkers seemed to kind of prevail in most situations,
as they tend to do, especially on the road and stuff like that. You're right. All right, so now let's go to Game 5. It is Sunday, October 8th. We are obviously still talking about Sportsman's Park. The series played completely at Sportsman's Park. Pivotal Game 5 on Sunday, October 8th, a week after the end of the regular season. Sewell again went with Denny Galehouse in a game he had to have. Mort Cooper was the Cardinals starter. Were the Cardinals a little bit leery of the Browns at this point?
Oh, they have to be. They have to be, because they already, no one expected this to go to Game 5. I mean, most people thought that this was a 4-game series, and baseball loved the idea that this game was lasting as long as it was.
There's Danny Litweiler doubling off the wall and left on the second pitch of the game, but Galehouse struck out the side, all swinging. He gets Johnny Hopp, Walker Cooper, and Ray Sanders. Brown's got to be feeling really good about Galehouse at this point.
Oh yeah, they're extremely happy with what he's putting out.
Pitched terrifically until the top of the 6th. Scoreless game. It was Sanders 0 for 2 in the game, but the third time was the charm as he homered to deep right for a 1-0 Cardinal lead. Sanders, an underrated player as it was, and he finally gets revenge there against Galehouse, but still, the Browns are in the game. Bottom of the 6th, after a single, a ground out, and another single, George McQuinn walks to load the bases, but Mort Cooper, who is absolutely an outstanding pitcher, equal to the moment, he gets Al Zarilla looking on a pitch there that looked like it could have been a ball, and then he gets Mark Christman looking on a pitch to end the inning. Still 1-0 Cardinals through 7. Another example of how close this series really was. But dangerous Danny Litweiler hit the first pitch of the 8th to right and out of there for a 2-0 lead, and that was all Mark Cooper needed.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely.
Now, Sewell had good success with pinch hitters during the series and during the season, but all 3 that he sent up in the 9th inning were no match at all for Mort Cooper. First, Milt Burns, a guy who we talked about earlier, he comes up and Cooper will get him with strike 3. Looking. Chet Labs. Next pinch hitter up again. Strike 3. Looking. So it came down to Mike Chartak. 2 outs, none on in the 9th. He swings and misses at this one to end the game.
Mm-hmm.
That one didn't end the game, but this one did. What a cut he had, as Harry Carey would have said. 12 strikeouts for Mort Cooper, a 2-0 shutout, and 3-2 lead in the series. So at the pivotal 5th game then going to the Cardinals, did baseball breathe a sigh of relief a little bit that order was restored, or were they really expecting and hoping at this point that, let's let it go 7 and see what happens?
Yeah, I don't think baseball knew what was going on still, because the games are all fairly close. I mean, Game 5 almost reflects Game 1. Because the Browns only had 2 hits in Game 1, and those 2 hits led to those 2 runs. Cardinals had 2 home runs in Game 5, and those were those only 2 runs that they got. So, I mean, the pitching staffs, it was a very closely pitched series on both sides. I mean, you can't say that either team dominated the other in this series. I don't think baseball knew what to expect in Game 6.
Well, let's go to Game 6 now. And as we did for Game 4, we're going to turn the proceedings over to the Mutual Radio Network crew of Don Dunphy and Bill Slater. This game is on Monday, October 9th, 1944, with Nels Potter again throwing for the Browns and Max Lanier again throwing for the Cardinals.
Well, here is the game that could be the final game of this series if the Cardinals win it. It's going to be the starting pitchers of the second game working today. Left-handed Max Lanier for the St. Louis Cardinals and Nelson Potter for the St. Louis Browns. Neither of these pitchers finished that contest, that second game, although they both pitched very well.
Bright sun shining now on the playing surface of Sportsman's Park. Now Max Lanier winds up, pitches, Lab swings on it. It's a long fly to deep center field. Hop is going back near the fence, and he can't get it. He dives against the fence. The ball rolls away from the fence, and he is held up at third with a triple, a terrific blow to center field. In the start of the second inning, McQuinn swings on it, hits it back through the middle. It's going for a hit. A run scores. In the series, got 1 yesterday. A pitch to him, he swings on this one, hits it down past Crispin, down the left field line. Crispin has got Kurowski trapped between first and second. McQuinn throws to Gutteridge. Gutteridge throws to first base where the pitcher is, and Kurowski is out. There in right field yesterday. Here's the pitch. It's swung on. It's a ground ball to Gutteridge. It goes through. And Cooper crosses to third. The pitch. Kurowski swings on it. It's a ground ball to shortstop. The play is at second. On to first. Not in time for a double play, and the run scores. And fourth very menacingly. Potter delivers. Bourbon swings on it. It's a ground ball through at third base. Sanders is rounding third, heading for the plate. Here comes the throw to the plate. It's cut off by the... Up next is Max Lanier. He slaps a single right back through the box. Coming in to score is Bourbon. Run number 3.
The Browns fighting it out, trailing 3-1. Here's the pitch. He swings and misses. A strikeout victim. Here's the pitch. He swings and misses. This could be the last pitch. Here it is. And he struck him out. It's all over. Great relief pitching, and all the Cardinals come tearing out of the dugout to grab Ted Wilkes, including Mort Cooper down there, who pitched a great game himself yesterday. The final score, the St. Louis Cardinals 3, the Browns 1, and the Cardinals take the World Series of 1944, 4 games to 2. The world's champions, the St. Louis Cardinals. Congratulations to them, and also congratulations to the losing Browns, who fought a great game battle.
That they did. So that was the story of the 1944 World Series, as you would have heard it on Mutual Radio back then. Of course, obviously, the first really televised World Series wouldn't be for another 3 years, and even then, it was just a flimsy little hookup, mostly in the East. So everyone was listening to the radio of the World Series if you weren't in St. Louis and couldn't get into the game. So in this series, we mentioned each team won a 1-run game. Each team won a 4-run game. And in the end, it came down to those last 2 games, 2 2-run wins by the Cardinals that were the difference. And as we saw, and as I said at the top, this series was a lot closer than anybody looking at it with the benefit of 81 years of distance, would say, oh, they won it in 6 games. Okay, but it was really a break here or a break there, and the Browns could have won the World Series.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a lot closer than most people would expect or would even think about in today's day.
And we mentioned a couple of big numbers, the 10 errors by the Browns, that obviously hurt them. And the 92 strikeouts in the series was a record for the time. I know that seems quaint today when everybody strikes out everybody left and right, but at the time, 92 strikeouts for a 6-game series, that was a major league record. I read there were the very first man in the Cardinals clubhouse to shake the hand of manager Billy Southworth was Luke Sewell. And Southworth said it was a great series, and Luke Sewell is a grand sport and a real gentleman. Here's the thing, Jeff. It's kind of hard to pick an MVP in this series, isn't it? It would be another 11 years before that award even existed. But George McQuinn was obviously far and away the best hitter in the series, but he played for the losing team. You could have said maybe Mort Cooper, 16 strikeouts in 16 innings. Emil Verban hit .412 for the Cardinals, but they were really all singles and only a couple of RBI. Maybe Walker Cooper, who hit .318. Some even said Marty Marion because of his flawless defense in the series, in a series that had its share of errors. Who would you give the MVP to in this series?
That's a great question, and I think a lot of the individuals that you had mentioned, but another one that you didn't, Whitey Kowalski. He had a lot of key hits in the series. He didn't have a lot, but seemed that almost all of his hits that he had led to some type of scoring. Stan Musial, like I said before, he batted .304, had his home run, but there were a lot of players on both sides that earned. I mean, Cooper, Musial, and Verban all had 7 hits apiece. Any one of them. And then, of course, as a true Browns fan, I would simply argue that George McGuinn should have won the MVP, even though he was on a losing team.
Now, incidentally, each of the Cardinals got about $4,300 as their World Series shares. The Browns got about $2,800, man. That's about $78,000 and $51,000 respectively. In today's money in terms of buying power, though the way things are going by the time you see this, it could be a lot less. So let's go to 1945. The Browns were the defending American League champions, but they were in first place for all of one day, opening day. And though they had a strong second half, they finished third, 6 games behind Detroit. What happened to the Browns in 1945?
Well, I think what happened in 1945 across baseball, you began to see some of the stars return from war. Primarily Hank Greenberg, when he returned to the Tigers, they got all their power back. I mean, He was an absolute animal for the Tigers in 1945. The Browns could not keep up with the rest of the league. I mean, you got to remember, one of the things we did not mention earlier, the Browns had the most 4F categorized players in Major League Baseball now by the War Department. So all players were all the young men were categorized, depending upon their physical stature going into the war. If you had a 4F, which basically means the War Department didn't want you. You were not strong enough to help out with the military. The Browns had the most 4F players than anybody else. And between the all-stars coming back and the war effort still going on with the production, the Browns got caught up in all that. And they could not recapture the fire they had in 44.
Yeah, you mentioned, for those who are unaware, you 1A meant you were going to be drafted and you were definitely going to war. Absolutely. All the way down to 4F meant you physically weren't able to. But for even a lot of those guys, you still had to work. And who was it on the Browns who was working in a munitions plant or something in Akron and taking trains to the games?
Well, Danny Galehouse was working Deb Arms, Danny Galehouse. They worked within the wartime efforts, and there were several Browns players that had to work in Dayton or in Houston for half the week and then meet up with the Browns for the other half.
Very interesting times during World War II.
Today's day.
and President Roosevelt had famously said, I think it's in the best interest of the country that baseball continue. And it did, though it was definitely not exactly the same as it had been during the war or before the war, but it definitely gave us some interesting things. So 1945 was also a year for the Browns. It was also the year of Pete Gray, the famous one-armed outfielder. We don't have time to get into it too deeply, but let's talk about Pete Gray's story for just a minute. Here's a guy who lost his right arm at the age of 6 in an accident and never really wanted to be anything more than a ball player. And for obviously he's during the war, a chance, and he thought sometimes that he was a little bit of a publicity stunt. But talk about Pete Gray, the player.
Pete Gray, the player, prior to coming to St. Louis, he played down in Memphis for the Chickasaw. And if I'm not mistaken, he was one of the best players in the league at during the war down in Memphis.
MVP of the Southern League, yeah.
Yes, exactly. And there are many stories saying that he was a media darling, and it was a promotional. It was not a promotional. That he was a media stunt. I'm sorry,
a publicity stunt.
A publicity stunt. And there were some Browns players that welcomed him, and there were some Browns players that didn't like him on the team because he was taking playing time away from them. I read somewhere that Luke Sewell didn't really want him on the team either because he didn't really see him as a 100% ball player. And, they let him on. He did very well at the beginning portion of the year. But as the year went on, his numbers dropped a little bit. I think he only played in 77 games. But as far as being able to achieve what he did with his obvious handicap, it is an amazing story.
Anybody could hit 218 in the major leagues. That's something, even though a lot of guys couldn't do it with 2 arms. So the war ended, things started to return to normal, and that included the Browns. Sewell departed late in the 1946 season, and in less than a decade, the Browns were on the move again, though not to Los Angeles, though the folks in Los Angeles thought maybe they would get them this time. They ended up going to Baltimore, and part of that, really, the move by the powers that be in baseball was almost as much to get Bill Veeck out of baseball as it was to get the Cardinals, to have St. Louis by themselves and the Browns to go to a good market in Baltimore, wasn't it?
Yes, it is. I'm a huge Bill Veeck fan.
Me too.
And the stories of Bill Veeck as an owner with the Indians, with the Milwaukee Brewers in the minor leagues, Chicago White Sox are fantastic. But he did ruffle some feathers, and in the late 1940s, early 1950s, the Cardinals ownership was having some issues, and there were some rumblings that the Cardinals may move themselves. Well, Bill Veeck saw the idea that he would pick up the Browns, and he would make the Browns the #1 team in St. Louis. Well, unfortunately for Bill Veeck, Anheuser-Busch purchased the Cardinals, and Stan Musial stayed around, Enos Slaughter stayed around, and the writing on the wall was definitely there for the Browns to be moving out of St. Louis and eventually going to Baltimore. Now, they almost went to Milwaukee, but the Boston Braves beat them to that move. Mm-hmm. There were reports that they could have gone to Houston, but Baltimore was where they ended up.
And as we know, the Orioles today are looked at as, one of the model franchises most years anyway. At least they have won World Series and had Hall of Fame players and great moments and great memories. Meanwhile, the Browns are, again, as you mentioned, a bit of an afterthought. As we look back at this 1944 team, what is their legacy?
I think their legacy basically comes in the fact that if you play good, solid baseball, you don't have to be hitting all the home runs. You don't have to, strike out everybody. But if you play a solid, good baseball as a team with strong leadership and a strong core group of players, you can still be successful in baseball. You see some of these teams pop up every now and then throughout history. I mean, there's most recently, how many times did the Florida Marlins have a solid team that would show up, win a World Series, and then kind of dissipate and kind of fall apart? There are, Arizona Diamondbacks from a couple of years ago. Same as another example. The Browns are a great example of a team that believed in themselves, took advantage of the opportunities that they had, and were extremely successful and caught the heart and mind of the baseball world in 1944.
But you mentioned earlier when we were talking that it's a shame that they are largely forgotten. There are obviously historians like yourself. There are fans. There's still fans of the St. Louis Browns. But you've told me before that a lot of people, if you stopped them on the street and asked them about the St. Louis Browns, would have no idea what you're talking about.
No. Very few people out here in Arizona know much about the St. Louis Browns. And the reason why I look at it is the Philadelphia Athletics moved to Kansas City, moved to Oakland, and now they're in the process of moving again. But they still kept the name Athletics. The Dodgers moved. The Giants moved. The Braves have all moved. The identity of those teams have moved along with each individual town. When the Browns moved to Baltimore, the incoming Baltimore Orioles didn't want to have anything to do with them. Now, there's stories about them, not bringing equipment or anything like that. But the only thing the Baltimore Orioles brought of the St. Louis Browns were the team colors, the brown and the orange. Because of that, most people today, when they think of the Browns, they think of the Cleveland Browns. I've been at card shows when people have told me that the St. Louis Browns were a minor league football team. So there's not a whole lot of knowledge, at least in certain parts of the country. Again, you go back to St. Louis, and I would say that you're going to find a large group of individuals with the St. Louis Browns Historical Society that will argue for days on the history and the legacy of this franchise, because the players that played for them throughout their course of the franchise's history are absolutely amazing. I mean, you have everything from, Moonlight Grahams on almost every team to players that made the all-star teams consistently. The Ned Garvers, the Ken Williams, the Jack Tobins, the George Stones, great players during their legacy, during the franchise's history that people don't really remember because the Browns name is not out there anymore.
Or Eddie Goodell's a guy that people probably recognize.
Eddie Goodell.
There's that.
Yeah.
And maybe one day, if folks, do yourself a favor and look up a guy named Jim McLaughlin who played one game, had one at bat for the St. Louis Browns. That's a story for another day. Again, Jeff's website is stlbrowns764.com. Jeff, thanks for being with us on Sports Rewind.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, folks, that is Sports Rewind for now. Be sure to join us next time when we will take another fresh look at the old here on Sports Rewind. See you next time.
Baseball has given me many exciting moments since that afternoon when I played my first game back in 1884. But none of them gives me a greater thrill than the privilege of sending this message to you of our armed forces throughout the world. Baseball's place in our American way of life has remained steadfast. And through this picture, we want you to know that the crack of the bat, the slide for the bag, and the roar of the crowd still are a part of our America.